Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. Good to be with you here. And we're going to have a great conversation today about problem solving and fast problem solving, which I think is going to be really fascinating, and a method and a process that you can use in your business to do that. Anyway, it's good to be with you. The point of Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from and to get better at what we do. Now, we do this on LinkedIn Live. We do it on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, I think, and probably something else. But we monitor those platforms during the show. If you send in your question, we try to get it to our guest so that they can get to the answers you need. Now, today, it's a real pleasure to have David Komlos on from Syntegrity. He's the CEO of Syntegrity. He's an author, speaker, early stage investor. He's an advisor to top leaders on fast problem solving and mobilization. He's written for HBR, Wall Street Journal, chief executive, and has been a guest on lots of the leading programs, and is a contributor writer for Forbes. Co-contributor, we both contribute there. So his book, Cracking Complexity, I think opens a new light on the topic of solving problems. David, welcome.
Great to be here, Rhett. Thanks for that great introduction.
Well, you're welcome, and it's good to have you, because I think and we are living in a really complex world and in a complex business environment. And you talk a lot about complexity. When you think of complexity and what people are dealing with now, what does that mean to you? And in a sense, one of the things I found interesting in your work is you talk about how we're doing it in a lot of ways. We're approaching this complexity in the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I can say that we're approaching complexity in the wrong way is because there's other kinds of challenges too that exist. And we get mixed up in the approaches, I think, that fit for one kind of challenge, but not another. Dave Snowden and his Cynefin framework are very instructive here, Rhett, in that he talks about different kinds of challenges, simple ones, which, you solve based on the facts, even if you've never encountered that kind of a challenge, you just figure it out yourself. Complicated challenges, which are tricky, especially for non-experts, like if you're putting in a new accounting system or if your car breaks down, that's a complicated challenge. Those are linear challenges that have checklists and lots of experts to do for you what they've done for others. These are solved problems. Just go to the experts, right? When it comes to complex challenges, like how do we deal with the opioid epidemic? How do we address sexual assault on campus? How do we grow faster as an organization? How do we innovate? How do we take out cost more sustainably? How do we lead in the customer experience? How do we merge better? Those are all complex challenges, which means lots of moving parts, not static parts, lots of dynamics, lots of people involved, and they need to be solved fresh each time. So that's different than a complicated challenge where you may have never seen it, but it's been solved many, many times and you can just hire the experts. Complex challenges require a diversity of talent to be brought to bear in order to solve them. And I don't think we approach that need for a diversity of talent and knowledge and experience and perspective very well.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. And I like this idea that these what you're not saying is that there's a cookie cutter approach to. I'm actually working on a big integration program right now and a merger. And the inclination initially was, well, let's just bring in one of the big four to come in and you help us do this, right? They've got an approach. They have an approach that's worked at such and such, and that just doesn't work today, does it?
Not entirely. No, it certainly doesn't, especially with change initiatives. Like post-merger integration is about two or more cultures coming together for the first time. People who are used to being the big fish in a small pond becoming the smaller fish in a big pond, different dynamics, different aspirations, different ways of doing work. And to have consulting firms come in, and apply the same model, which is an interview-based analytical model to these kinds of human dimensions and challenges, doesn't really get you to the end of task. There's a lot of stuff that it does that's good: financial analysis, looking at synergies, looking at the lift that's available, looking at all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, human to human interaction needs to be done in a different way than, interviews and hoping that people buy into the synthesized recommendations of very smart people. It needs something more. And so, they don't get the job done entirely on those kinds of things.
Someone said the word listening tour the other day to me, and that my head just about exploded, because a listening tour is not going to make this integration work, right?
Yeah, listening tour is going to really inform the person who's doing all the listening, but not all the people who are doing the talking.
Right. And I actually wonder what you actually get from a listening tour, honestly. Like, do you in a group of 50 people, do you really get the truth? Do you really get the whitewashed version of it? You get the clean version of it, right?
You do. Unless you engineer some sort of approach to getting people to open up and be very disarmed in the presence of many more people, which, by the way, is imperative when you're trying to solve something big. You need lots of people. But if you just throw them into a conversation or an interview, many of them are not going to speak from the heart.
And I imagine your process gets to that, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So, what I find interesting is that this is the foundation behind this was Ashby's law and the law of requisite variety. But can you talk about the formula that you have for solving these big challenges and with speed and agility? I think we're all going through, because of COVID and this everything that's sort of gone on in the last year, we've gone through a lot of change, and we're getting ready to go through it again, right? As business opens up in some places and we get back to whatever that new normal is. Companies are going through this transition. They're going through this big change.
Yeah.
Talk about the book and talk about the ideas and the principles behind this system.
You mentioned Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of what I deal with, and I'm fortunate to have discovered this stuff from some of the key scientists over the last 150 years, right?
Yeah.
Standing on their shoulders. This is all about universal truths and first principles. So it's really boiling down the essence of what's really going on to these first principles. And we've, baked our formula based on these first principles. So that's really important, because you can really make a dent in the universe when you get down to first principles. So one of the first principles is requisite variety, which says, mm-hmm. Only variety can absorb variety. Only variety can destroy variety. What does that mean? So you're dealing with a high variety challenge, like transformation, like coming out of COVID and hitting the ground running, changing your business model. Customers' habits have changed. How do you address all that new variety? How do you address all those pieces when your competition is trying to address those pieces at the same time? Right. Who gets there first? If you're a government leader, how do you serve citizens whose lives have been impacted dramatically and quickly by the pandemic? There's a lot of moving parts. The only way to address those moving parts is to bring to bear an equal amount of variety on the challenge. And the way you do that is by tapping into a diversity of knowledge and information and experience and overall talent and influence, and combine it all and bring it together to address the complexities of the environment that you're faced with. Our book, our formula, is all about how do you engineer the bringing to bear of all that variety on a high variety challenge? How do you engineer a controlled explosion of brain power and emotional commitment to solving something and then executing the solution? There's 10 steps in the formula. I won't go through all 10 steps, but basically those 10 steps are designed to engineer a high volume, high quality, high speed collisions, conversations, interactions in large groups of people. I mean, 20, 30, 40, 50 people who've been convened over video or physically all together all at once. And it lays out the 10 steps that basically, if you follow, you can actually engineer those collisions that yield the matching of the variety of the challenge based on the collective intelligence and collective commitment of that group of people who've been carefully chosen.
I mean, it sounds like to me that there's conflict involved in that, or debate, or how do you handle what comes out of complexity is often different opinions, different thoughts, different directions. How does that handle that? How do you get people sort of focused in on the right course and the right way, and then, which I sort of see as that getting to the right decision, right? To get to what is the right call, then you've got to have the believership and the faith that that's the right, people have to buy into it. And then there's the whole action, I think, of how do you take action. But how does it resolve that conflict, that natural conflict that's going to be there?
Yeah, so we try to generate that natural conflict. We try to accelerate the arrival of that productive friction and not have it be like what we talked about earlier when 50 people in a room being interviewed and trying to give the truth. They don't give the truth unless it's engineered, this disarming environment. So what we do, to answer your question, Rhett, is we start off with, what is the question that this group has been convened to answer? So we phrase the challenge in the form of a question, like, what must we do over the next 3 months to hit the ground running, coming out of COVID? Or what do we have to do over the next 2 years to become number one in customer experience? Whatever the question is. And then we don't predetermine the agenda. We let the group who's been convened explore what they need to explore. In other words, determine the topics they need to discuss in order to answer the question. And when you don't predetermine the agenda, when you literally bring a group together for a meeting and say, here's the question, but schedule is we're going to be here till the end of the day, but we don't know what we're talking about in order to get after that question. We give them a way to identify 6 or 8 or 10 topics that they think they need to discuss. Just the act of giving them permission, so to speak, and liberty over the agenda, that's where the believership starts to be born. And that's where the buy-in and the alignment, like we own this, is born. Then once they've come up with their topics, let's say 6 topics of discussion, we don't just throw them into breakout meetings and say, have at it and do your best. We do a few things. So number one, we tell them we're going to have 3 rounds of meetings on all 6 topics. So there's going to be an iterative approach to this. We're going to go through 1 through 6, then we're going to do 1 through 6 again, and then 1 through 6 again. And we're going to fine tune our thinking along the way, right? We're going to diverge before we converge, right? And we don't just throw people into a room hoping that they behave well and that they speak their minds and that they don't dominate the conversation. We actually assign them speaking roles: member, critic, and observer. If you're a member of a topic, you and the other members own that topic. And over 3 rounds of meetings, you're trying to advance that topic as far as possible to answer that bigger question around how you're going to lead in customer experience. If you're a critic, you're forced to listen for the first 15 minutes of a 45-minute meeting. And then you're only given a minute to provide your critique on what the members could be doing better to get to end of task, right? And then if you're an observer, you're playing a very frustrating role, which is you can only listen. Now, everyone gets to play those roles on different teams. So if I'm an observer listening for 45 minutes, I'm going off to another team as a member or as a critic and vice versa. Bring that group of people together and go through 3 rounds of meetings as members, critics, and observers on topics they care about in order to answer the question. That's where the cross-pollination happens. That's where the disarmed contributions happen. That's where the different kinds of listening happens. And it yields a really good outcome really quickly. Does that answer your question?
It does. No, it's fascinating. I mean, that's a way different approach, right? To forcing, and not forcing, that's not the right word, for facilitating this kind of dialogue. What, when you say in the 10-step process, so in that meeting, how do you get to, because you talk about solving some of these complex things in a matter of a couple of days. So once you go through this stage, what happens now? What's the next for that? What happens next?
Coming out of a 2-day session or over video, a 5-day session that's not consecutive hours, right? It's done over 5 days, let's say. You have a group of 20, 30, 40, 50 people who have said, they've answered the question. These are the things we have to do in order to lead in customer experience. And here's, how it all, comes together in a plan or a strategy. What's next is we take a smaller core team of decision makers and we get them to make some final decisions. So they've given the larger group, they've given them discussion rights. They've retained decision rights to just put the final, signature on the plan, the budget, the investment. And just have a small, short meeting with them to do that, because ultimately the best thinking of that broader group with which that core team has been involved in shaping the recommendations and the strategies and the actions, they don't need a lot of time to massage that. Once you get the collective thinking and co-creation power of the larger group really concentrated, like a magnifying glass concentrates the energy of the sun on, answering this question, there's not a lot of finessing to do afterwards. But there's a next step of finessing, and then there's launching into execution. And the nice thing is these decision makers have a group of 20, 30, 40, 50 key influencers, key stakeholders, key movers and shakers who've been carefully convened and contributed to, the solution, all bought in and ready to hit the ground running.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's fascinating. I know we're not going to cover all 10 of the steps, but talk about some of the other steps that you think are critical to making this sort of process successful.
Sure. I'll talk about eliminating the noise.
Okay.
Which is one of the steps. And I'll also talk about how we really engineer collisions, because I don't want the word engineer just hanging out there with you, Rhett, sort of as a buzzword.
Right.
So eliminating the noise and the cost of codification, it's an important concept to wrap people's heads around. When you're going to bring together a diverse group of people, they don't speak the same language. Even if they all speak English or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever, they don't all speak the same language. As you know, they come from different walks of life, different lived experience, different subject matter expertise, right? If you're going to get a group of marketers together, there's not a lot of lost in translation. If you're getting a lot of sales professionals together, they all speak the same language. But once you bring this group of people together to solve something that can only be solved by a diversity of talent, you first have to pay a tax that we call the cost of codification. And really, we want to accelerate this cost of codification to not take many, many, many hours or days until these people start understanding what each other is saying and not talking past each other. So what we do is we think very carefully. Once we know who's being brought together to solve the question, what is the level setting material, including the glossary of items and the terminology that these people might use? How do we level set people so that when we bring them together, we've started to pay down that cost of codification, right? That's not earth shattering, and people do this before workshops and meetings all the time. But the cost of codification challenge can maybe inform people's thinking, what else do I have to put in front of this diverse group of people before I even have them come together to talk together that will make it easier for them to start understanding each other sooner?
Okay.
So that's the cost of codification and eliminating the noise, really good pre-reads that really focus people in on starting to understand what really matters and what is sort of superfluous. That's a step.
That's a hard, I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, but I think it's a step we often miss, isn't it? I mean, that's something I don't think we do very well often.
Correct. Yeah, not everybody, right? And unless you've heard of the need to do this and the need to think about like the breadth of variety that you need to bring together, or the degree to which you have to eliminate the noise or level set people to speak, the same language, people give it their best shot, but they may not give it the full shot, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what is partly called out in our formula and in the book Cracking Complexity. And then the notion, Rhett, of engineering these collisions. When we say engineer, and it's not necessarily straightforward to do, you have to use an Excel spreadsheet. We use an algorithm. When we talk about engineering collisions, well, when you go back to requisite variety, let's say the right variety of people to solve your customer experience challenge or your merger opportunity. Let's say that's 30 people. We're going to bring together 2 people from Accenture, 1 person from McKinsey, 26 people from the companies that are coming together in this merger from various levels. So we have the right variety of people, including some external experts to inform our thinking. Now, if you bring those people together, you don't want 5 of them to connect really, really well and the other 25 to check out for a variety of reasons. And even if they're all really gung-ho and contributing, you don't want content not meeting content. You don't want people to not meet one another in the course of these deliberations. And so when you bring 30 people together, you have to account for 30 times 29 connection points. If you
Right.
bring 40 people together, you need to account for 40 times 39 connection points. And so if you pay attention to the collision points of these people, these intersection points, then you can assign them to teams that not only put them on the right teams based on their subject matter expertise, but also builds in the cross-pollination that you need by having everyone meet everyone in the course of these deliberations and not leave that to chance. So next time, when you, your listeners, more importantly, are convening meetings of, more than 8, 9, 10 people, whether they're doing it scientifically or whether they're doing, a little bit of art applied to this, think about, how am I colliding everyone, not just a subset of those people? How am I making sure everyone talks to everyone?
No, that's actually really smart. And again, not something I think we all often think of, but putting some thought behind, how you do that and how you design that, I think is really, really important. How do you, and I can see sort of the answer to my question, how do you, because this is such a different approach, how do you get team buy-in, and how does that, from your experience in working with this process, how do you get leadership buy-in on this?
To do it in the first place?
Yeah.
Well, so we've been doing this for about 20 years. You just asked the $100 million question, so to speak.
Sorry about that.
How do you get leaders to buy in? Well, not every leader is going to buy in. And, this is sort of next level leadership, right? And we've worked with a lot of leaders who've bought in, obviously, over the last 20 years. Sure. We've done over 1,000 projects, right? And multiple leaders who really turn to this. There's other leaders who just don't want to do this.
Maybe the better question then, I get that, is what are the characteristics of leaders who look at this and say, this is brilliant? I mean, like, what characteristics do you find in those leaders? How about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. These are leaders who understand that complex challenges can only be solved through, many diverse perspectives being brought to bear. It's leaders who are typically in accountable positions where they really are, leading the charge on the companies or the government department's top challenges. If you combine those two characteristics, I'm in charge of the defining challenges of my department or my company. I'm a CEO, I'm a head of a country, et cetera. And I understand that the answers lie within many people, not in any small group of people. Those are the ideal candidates to turn to this and go, okay, I get what you're saying. Your sort of science brought to collisions around diversity of talent. They buy in very quickly because they have to, because they don't have time on their side. A lot of people who aren't necessarily dealing with the most pressing challenges their company or their team is faced with, and or who don't necessarily believe in the power and the potential of larger groups of talent contributing to solve challenges. They want to handle these with small deliberations. They're not going to buy in so readily. So
one of the things I'm fascinated by here is I'm on this TV show coming up in the fall, and we're going to film it in June. And the premise of the show is we have 4 days to take the UN development goals, and they're going to assign us one of the UN development goals, ending poverty, eradicating cancer, solving, some of those big issues. I see that, and we've got to bring a team together that doesn't know each other, that doesn't speak the same language as you talked about. And I was just thinking about this process. This is brilliant to help we have to come up with a business plan to create a business in 4 days to solve that issue, right? This is perfect for that. And I've been thinking about how do we bring a team together to do this in such a short period of time. I'm used to creating a business plan, but not in 4 days, and not set on such a massive scale, right? So I may need to have more conversation. I need to have more conversations about how to do that, because
anytime, man.
Because this is fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the program today. And I got to get this book, Cracking Complexity. You can get it at Amazon. I guess people aren't going to bookstores right now, but get it online. Get your copy, because I think this is just a book everybody should. If you're a leader, you should read this. So David, thank you so much.
Been a huge pleasure speaking with you, and a privilege. Thank you.
Well, I do want to have some more discussion with you about this, because I love the process. So Anyway, thank you for being here today on Power Lunch, spending some time with us. Again, get a copy of Cracking Complexity. Do you have a copy with you? Yeah, there it is. I've got the e-version. So get your copy. It's right there. And how can people get in touch with you, David?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me at syntegritygroup.com. They can find me at crackingcomplexity.com.
And you guys you do speaking as well. You'll go into a company and show them how to do this. So you're out there to help.
Absolutely. Help is the right word.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you for spending some time with us. We'll be back next Tuesday, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. If you want to check out the website that's got the upcoming schedule, please do. It's powerlunch.live, powerlunch.live. We'll see you next week.